Hey, beautiful souls, welcome back to Soul Stories. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to join our family. Stay with us, because a new love story is about to begin. The winter of 1987 brought the kind of cold to the Appalachian mountains that old folks said could freeze the soul right out of a person. Snow piled higher than cabin windows, and the wind howled through the hollows like something alive and hungry. It was during this merciless season that word spread through the small town of Ember Creek about the dying man on Blackridge Mountain. His name was Silas Thornwood, though most people just called him the Mountain Man, or, when they were feeling less charitable, the Hermit of Blackridge. He had lived alone on that mountain for nearly 30 years, coming down only twice a year to trade pelts and handcrafted furniture for supplies. He spoke to no one beyond what was necessary, looked at people with eyes that seemed to see through them, and disappeared back into the wilderness like smoke on the wind. Nobody knew where Silas had come from or why he had chosen such complete isolation. There were rumors, of course. Some said he was a Vietnam veteran who had seen too much and could no longer stand the company of other humans. Others whispered that he had killed a man in another state and was hiding from justice. The most romantic among the townspeople suggested a broken heart, a woman who had shattered him so completely that he had retreated from love and humanity altogether. But these were all just stories people told to fill the void of not knowing. When the hunter found Silas collapsed in his cabin, burning with fever and barely conscious, he had struggled down the mountain through waist-deep snow to alert the town. Dr. Harold Patterson organized the rescue, and 4 men carried Silas down on a makeshift stretcher while the wind tried to push them off the narrow trails. They brought him to the small clinic that served Ember Creek and the surrounding communities. Dr. Patterson examined him and delivered his grim diagnosis: pneumonia, severe and advanced. The infection had spread deep into both lungs, and Silas's body, weakened by years of hard living and what appeared to be weeks of illness before he was found, was failing in its fight. The first nurse assigned to care for Silas was Margaret Chen, a 20-year veteran of mountain medicine who had seen everything from bear attacks to mining accidents. She lasted 3 days. Silas, in his fever-addled state, had thrown a water pitcher at her head and called her names that made the other staff members blush. He refused her medications, tore out his 4 lines, and once attempted to climb out the window despite being barely able to stand. The second nurse was Thomas Bradley, a calm and patient man who had worked with difficult patients his entire career. He made it 5 days before requesting a transfer. Silas had not been violent with him, but he had simply stopped responding entirely. He would not eat, would not take his medicine, would not acknowledge that Thomas existed at all. He lay facing the wall, silent and still, as if he had already decided to die and was simply waiting for his body to catch up with his decision. 3 more nurses tried and failed. The fever continued to rage. Dr. Patterson told anyone who would listen that Silas Thornwood was going to die, not because medicine could not save him, but because the man himself had given up. There was something broken inside him that went far deeper than infected lungs, something that no antibiotic could touch. This was the situation when Clementine Barker arrived in Ember Creek. Clementine was not a nurse. She was not a doctor or any kind of medical professional. She was a 43-year-old woman who had spent the last 20 years of her life in a women's correctional facility in Ohio for a crime that had made national headlines in its day. She had killed her husband, stabbed him 17 times with a kitchen knife while their children slept upstairs. The newspapers had called her a monster, a cold-blooded murderer, the face of evil hiding behind a suburban smile. What the newspapers had not reported, what had not come out until years later, was that her husband had been abusing those sleeping children in ways too horrific to speak aloud. The courts had not believed her claims at the time, had seen only a jealous wife inventing stories to justify her violence. It was only after her conviction, when her children were old enough to speak for themselves, that the truth emerged. But by then, Clementine had already served 10 years, and the wheels of justice turn slowly when it comes to admitting mistakes. She had been released 3 months before that brutal winter, her conviction overturned, her record expunged. But 20 years in prison leaves marks that no legal document can erase. She had no home to return to, no family waiting for her. Her children, now adults, had their own lives and their own traumas to work through. They loved her, but they could not be around her yet. The memories were too fresh, too complicated. Clementine had come to Ember Creek because it was small and far away from everywhere she had ever been. She rented a room above the hardware store and took work where she could find it, mostly cleaning houses for people who did not know her history. She kept to herself, spoke softly when she spoke at all, and tried to figure out how to be a person in a world that had changed so much while she was locked away. She heard about the dying mountain man the way everyone in small towns hears about everything. Through whispers at the general store, and conversations that stopped when she walked by. She heard that he was refusing to live, that something inside him had broken, that all the medicine in the world could not save a man who did not want to be saved. Clementine understood that kind of brokenness. She had felt it herself during those first years in prison when she had wanted nothing more than to close her eyes and never open them again. She had survived only because of another inmate, an old woman named Ruth, who had sat with her night after night, not offering comfort or advice, just presence. Ruth had understood that sometimes the only thing that can save a drowning person is someone willing to drown alongside them. She went to the clinic on a Tuesday morning, her breath making clouds in the frozen air. Dr. Patterson listened to her offer with obvious skepticism. She had no medical training, no qualifications, no experience with patient care. But he was desperate, and Silas was dying, and perhaps that combination made him willing to try anything. Clementine entered Silas's room for the first time just after noon. The curtains were drawn, and the only light came from a small lamp on the bedside table. Silas lay on his side, facing the wall, his breathing labored and wet. He did not turn when she entered, did not acknowledge her presence at all. She did not speak to him that first day. She simply pulled a chair to the corner of the room, as far from his bed as the small space would allow, and sat down. She brought a book with her, a worn copy of poetry by someone named Mary Oliver that she had found in the hardware store's lost and found box. She read silently, turning pages, existing in the same space as this dying stranger without asking anything of him. Hours passed. Nurses came to check vital signs and left again, casting curious glances at the woman in the corner. Clementine remained, reading her poetry, breathing in rhythm with the labored sounds from the bed. When night fell, she closed her book and left without a word. She returned the next morning and did the same thing. And the next day, and the next. She asked nothing, said nothing, demanded nothing. She simply existed in that room, a quiet presence in the corner, reading her poetry while Silas continued his slow march toward death. On the 5th day, Silas spoke for the first time. His voice was a ragged whisper, barely audible over the sound of his own breathing. He did not turn to look at her, did not move from his position facing the wall. "Why are you here?" Clementine considered the question carefully before answering. "Because I know what it feels like to want to die." Silence stretched between them. Then Silas made a sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been a sob, too broken to tell the difference. "Everyone thinks they know that feeling. They don't." Clementine turned a page in her book. "I killed my husband. I spent 20 years in prison for it. I thought about dying every single day for the first 5 years. I planned it out, figured out exactly how I would do it. The only reason I'm still alive is because an old woman named Ruth sat with me in the dark and didn't try to make me feel better. She just stayed." Silas was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was different, less hostile, more curious. "Why did you kill him?" Clementine closed her book and looked at the shape of his back under the thin hospital blanket. Because he was hurting my children in ways I couldn't stop any other way. Because the people who were supposed to protect them didn't believe me when I told them what he was doing. Because I chose my children over my own soul. Another long silence. The machines beeped their steady rhythm. The wind. Dee rattled the windows. I was a surgeon, Silas said, and the words seemed to cost him something, like they had been locked away so long that releasing them was painful. In Da Nang, during the war. Clementine waited. She had learned patience in prison, learned that sometimes the most important thing you could offer someone was space to find their own words. There was this boy, Vietnamese, maybe 8 years old, maybe younger. Hard to tell with the malnutrition. He got caught in a crossfire, took shrapnel to the abdomen. They brought him to me, and I worked on him for 6 hours. 6 hours with my hands inside this child, trying to put him back together. Silas's voice cracked, and he coughed, a wet and terrible sound. Clementine rose from her chair and poured water from the pitcher by his bed. She held the glass where he could reach it if he chose to. After a moment, he rolled slightly and took it from her hand, their fingers brushing briefly. He drank, then continued. He made it through the surgery. I sat with him all night, watching him breathe, making sure he stayed stable. In the morning, I went to get coffee, just 10 minutes away from his bedside. When I came back, he was dead. An American soldier, one of our own, had smothered him with a pillow. Said he was just a gook. Said I was wasting resources on the enemy. Tears were streaming down Silas's face now, cutting tracks through the fever sweat on his cheeks. I tried to report it. I went to every commanding officer I could find. They told me to keep quiet, said it would cause problems, said the boy was already dead and nothing could change that. They sent me home 3 weeks later with a medical discharge, said I was having a psychological break, and maybe I was, maybe I am still. Clementine sat on the edge of his bed. She did not touch him, did not try to comfort him with meaningless words. Empli sat and let his grief fill the room. I came up to this mountain because I couldn't stand to look at other people anymore, Silas whispered. Every face I saw, I wondered what they were capable of. What evil lived behind their eyes. I couldn't trust anyone. I couldn't trust myself. So I ran away from all of it. And now you're dying, Clementine said softly. And you think that's what you deserve. Silas looked at her then, really looked at her for the first time. His eyes were blue, faded like old denim, and full of a pain so deep it seemed bottomless. Don't you think you deserve to die for what you did? Clementine considered the question. She had asked herself the same thing 1,000 times in that prison cell. I think I deserve to live with what I did. I think dying would be easier. And I don't deserve easy. I deserve to carry this weight every day, to remember, to feel the blood on my hands until my last breath. Running toward death is just another kind of running away. Something shifted in Silas's expression. Clementine saw it happen, saw the tiny crack form in the wall he had built around himself. I'm tired, he said. I've been tired for 30 years. I know, Clementine replied. But being tired isn't the same as being finished. You still have breath in your lungs. You still have something left to give, even if you don't know what it is yet. She stood and walked to the window, pulling back the curtains to let in the pale winter light. Snow was falling again, soft and silent, covering the world in white. That boy you saved, she said, her back to him. Those 6 hours you fought for his life, that mattered. What someone else did afterward doesn't erase what you did. You loved a child you didn't even know enough to fight for him with everything you had. That's not nothing. Silas was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, painfully, he pushed himself up into a sitting position. His face was gray and his hands shook, but he was upright. I want to eat something, he said, and his voice was stronger than it had been in weeks. Clementine turned from the window and smiled, the first genuine smile that had crossed her face since she left prison. Over the following weeks, Silas slowly recovered. The infection retreated as his will to live returned. Clementine came every day, and they talked for hours about things neither of them had ever spoken aloud before. He told her about the mountain, about the creatures he had observed, about the way the sunrise looked from the high peaks. She told him about prison, about Ruth, about her children and the complicated love that stretched between them despite everything. When spring came and the snow melted and Silas was strong enough to leave the clinic, he did not return alone to his mountain. Clementine went with him, not as a nurse or caretaker, but as something they could not yet name. They were two broken people who had found in each other a mirror and a window, a reflection of their own pain and a view into another way of being. They built a life together on Blackridge Mountain, slowly and carefully, the way you build anything that matters. They were not healed, because healing is not a destination but a journey. They carried their wounds with them always, but they carried them together, and that made all the difference. The people of Ember Creek never fully understood what had happened in that hospital room. They only knew that the mountain man had lived when everyone expected him to die, saved by a woman with no medical training and a history that should have disqualified her from helping anyone. They called it a miracle, though Clementine and Silas knew it was something both simpler and more complicated than that. It was just two people, broken and die. Different ways, choosing to be broken together instead of alone. Sometimes that is the most unthinkable thing of all, and sometimes it is the only thing that saves us.